Hi, my name's Jim Leach, and on September 8th, 1974, the day of the Alverne fire, I was 9 years old. My dad was working for Sanders Associates in Nashua, and we were planning to go to the annual family outing for the company at Whalum Park. And my dad had his scanner on, his police scanner, as he always does, and he heard what was going on down at Alverne High School. So he grabbed his Bell & Howell Super 8 movie camera, and before taking the family to the park, we went down there and he filmed some footage of the fire. Then we went to the park for the day. We got back and went back down to Alverne and filmed some more. And what you're going to see is the film shot by my dad, Leonard Leach, on September 8th, 1974.
My name's Mike Buxton. In 1974, in September of 1974, when the Alverne fire came in, I was a Nashua firefighter. I did not respond to Hudson as a Nashua firefighter. I responded because that was my old department. I started with the town of Hudson as a firefighter. My father was the incident commander, as we call them today. Back then it was deputy chief, and I went up there to assist. A couple of things that need to be remembered. The radio system that we have today and enjoy today certainly didn't exist back in 1974. Large diameter hose wasn't available as it is today. Even water supply and the tanker shuttles weren't as sophisticated as they are today. I assisted by running errands for my father, helping him place apparatus, and logistically until I had to come over here to go to work at 7 a.m.
Bruce Lawton, the spelling of that is L-A-U-G-H-T-O-N. At the time of the fire, I was stationed at Arlington Street Station, which was, at that time, it was engines 8 and 9. I was on the tail end with Ronnie Brickey, and the officer was Mo Lavoie, and the driver, I'm pretty sure, was Paul Knoll. We were woken up to a telephone call, still alarm, that Nashua High School was on fire. At that time, Nashua High School was now Elm Street. Before we made the turn onto Lake Street from Main Street, they stopped us and they said, respond to Hudson. And I look over at Ronnie Brickey, and we're at Seminole Plaza, and we could see the glow in the sky. That was from Main Street in Nashua. And I don't believe we ever lost sight of that glow until we arrived on the scene. When we arrived on the scene, we were directed to the rear of the school, and I had only been on the job just shortly over a year, and that's the best fire I'd ever seen. As we arrived at the location that they had given us, they had given us a supply line from an engine that was drafting from a pond, the rear of the school, at which time we had our water supply, and we set up a master stream, which is a large diameter nozzle on top of the engine. I guess it's north end of the school. If you're looking at the school, it would be the north end of the school. I was directed to take a hand line and set up the hand line at where what was left of the gym and the building, and try to knock down some of the fire that was there. And we were there. We drained the pond. Now we picked up and we went home, and I think it was, shift change was 8 o'clock. We went back for shift change. I did go back the next day after off duty to help pick up spaghetti, which is another term for holes in the street.
The building was heavily involved from the front. I didn't go out to the rear of the building for quite some time. and that was to move ladder 4 back around to the front where it ultimately got set up once a water supply got established in the front. You know, the gym was gone, literally non-existent. It was a pile of rubble. So the attic of the main school was heavily involved in spreading rapidly.
Have you ever talked to your dad about it? That what, you know, when he got there, what he was thinking, you know?
His only comments to me about the fire was he drove around the building and the rail wasn't there. The gymnasium was already gone. It had already collapsed. He knew that the attic was heavily involved. You could see the fire. You could see the fire on the second floor in the center of the building where the gymnasium attached to the main building. And his efforts at that point was to get nobody hurt and suppress the fire as best they could.
Ladder 4 was out of Amherst Street, and at that time it was a single man, just the driver, and that was John Kempton that was on that ladder. We never really worked together. The ladder 4 was in the front of the building, and engine 8 was in the rear by the remains of the gym. Okay, the last hydrant before the school was at Alvin Chapel. And if you know the road, it's got to be close to a mile. So we had this truck and another one of Nash's retired engines set up pumping and relay pumping. I was not involved in that evolution, but I was there the day after my day off to help pick up some of that hose. Knowing today, nice fire alarm system and sprinkler system would have been nice. Because in those days, 911, I don't think 911 was available. So the initial phone call, more information on the phone call, the operator who took the call saying the high school's on fire. Which high school's on fire?
I'm Tom Levesque. At one point in my life, I was fire chief in Litchfield, but long before that, I had just gone on the department when we got a phone call, a dispatch. We actually used to get our phone calls in those days by Kelly's answering service. There was no paging system in those days for us, and we got a call to respond down to Hudson, mutual aid to a fire. So 3 of us went down in a tanker, which was our frontline piece, and we ended up hauling water for, I don't know, probably 12, 14 hours, I'm gonna guess. But we were on the way, and on the radios crackling constantly, and everybody's going to Hudson. And I remember saying, well, the only place big enough to require that would be a high school. Well, lo and behold, all of a sudden, one of the Nashua apparatus is responding to Elburn High School in Hudson for working building fire. And so we get down there, and sure enough, we were just one of, I'm gonna have to guess, pretty close to 50 pieces of apparatus that were involved. We were basically involved just with shuttling, because our truck was basically a tanker, 1,600 gallons of water. And we would go back and forth from the down here to the central station, in those days the only station, and then we would go back up to the scene with water. And 1,600 gallons of water, when you're dumping in one of those portable tanks, does not last very long. It was nice to be able to help Hudson. They were, those of us in the Litchfield Fire Department over the years, always looked at them as our big brothers. And I'd like to think the guys in Litchfield still do. I haven't been associated with them for quite some time as I got a little bit older in time, but I enjoyed being a firefighter, let's put it that way. Even as just a volunteer. When we arrived that day, the fire was massive. Apparatus was everywhere. A lot of citizens were out, looking and watching. And as we just found out recently, we were so fortunate there was a gentleman from town that took quite a few minutes of footage of the fire. The fire was still going good, but nothing like it was when we first arrived. When we first arrived, it was just unbelievable. Water, like in most small towns, especially in those days, was really a major problem. There was no real close handy-by water. There was a pond right next door, which they drafted out of that, and that didn't take long to run that dry. It was an effort that, it was just concerted, and everybody just seemed to fall into place and knew what they were doing, as chaotic as it appeared to be at the time.
Rick Plummer in Hudson, New Hampshire, talking about the Alvern Fire of 1974. My part was varied that day. The tone went off at about 5:30 a.m. Came to the station. In those days, you didn't have voice announcements or anything. You just came to the station. Engine 1 had already left. I climbed aboard the tailboard of Engine 2, finished getting dressed as I sort of went out of the station. And we went up through the lights at Library Street, and we could see the glow in the sky all the way from here, so we knew we had a long day ahead of us. As the fire was progressing forward, there was a call to try and salvage some items from the office. A very large, very heavy desk, which turns out to be the PA system for the entire building. 4 of us picked that thing up and got it out of the building. I doubt it ever went back to work after that, but it was extremely heavy. I would estimate each one of us was carrying between 150 and 200 pounds on the corners. And my back felt kind of funny, but that was all right. And then we went back and packed everything up. Turns out it was about 18 hours. It was almost midnight by the time I finally got home again. And I was a little bit tired. As it turns out, the next day, I had severe pain in my leg. Turns out it was due to my back. And I spent 11 weeks recovering in bed. Eventually, I went back to my normal job, but not firefighting for a while. And a year later, in September, I actually got out of bed one Saturday morning and the pain came back, and I didn't move. I basically crawled out of the house, down the stairs, out of the driveway, into the car, over to the hospital. They wanted to know why I didn't take an ambulance. I said, "You kidding me? I know those guys." Oh well. So that was on a Saturday. On Wednesday, they finally did operate. The surgeon was hesitant up to that point, because I'd recovered. The surgery was done, and after 5 weeks recovery, I was pretty much back to normal. And eventually went back to firefighting and to Robinson Road. One other aspect of a day like that, that's 18 hours long, is you get hungry. And we were blessed to have a lot of volunteers, a lot of community support. And in fact, my wife, come on over, Linda. We had 2 young children, 4 and 6, and she found a neighbor that would take care of them for the duration, went out, got a whole lot of donuts and other food, and found plenty of takers. Her biggest challenge was she only wanted to feed firefighters. How strange is that, huh? Thank you.
We had a lot of young children running up when could I have a donut?
After the fact, the community was just unbelievable. Everything came together that needed to come together. A lot of help. Obviously, students needed to be placed in other venues and so forth. And the community outreach at that point was just amazing. We didn't have kids in the system at that point, so I can't really say firsthand how well it worked for them, but just very, very good response.
My name is Gary Rogers. I joined the fire department as a junior back in 1971, and I spent the next 35 years on the department. On the morning of the fire of Alvern, I lived off 102. I could hear the fire trucks going by early in the morning. Probably the fire whistle woke me up a little bit in the morning. I would call the emergency line once in a while to find out where the fires were, and I think I did that morning, and they told me it was at Alvern. I called my friend whose dad was on the department, and we both went up to the fire. He was on the juniors also. The juniors today are called the Explorers. We got here, we watched the fire for a while, but then they put us to work using my friend's dad's car. And we basically shuttled gasoline tanks and air bottles back and forth all day long from the fire, back to the station, getting them filled and coming back. I guess the best part we thought about that was that driving his dad's car had a bubble light with 2 flashing lights on it, and we got to use them all day long. So we did a lot of standing around here, but we did a lot of going back and forth to the station, and at the end of the fire, we did a lot of rolling of the hose. So that was pretty much it. Because I was a junior, we didn't get in on the fire itself, but we got to do work on the outside of the fire ground itself. So.
What time in the morning did you get here?
Probably about 5:30. We were totally amazed that there was, that the school was on fire. It was our school, it was on fire. And there was so much of it on fire. I mean, the whole back of the building was on fire with smoke coming out everywhere. And it was just unreal. We stood, there may be pictures of us standing out back by the auditorium, and we just watched it just kind of just fall down and such. So my biggest thing I remember is rolling up the 2.5-inch hose from the Alvirne Chapel all the way up to here. And going by it several times with the car, going to get the gas and air bottles, you could see the pumpers in line pumping just to get the water there. That didn't count the tankers that were rolling back and forth all day too. So I know that everybody was amazed. Nobody could get into the building, especially with the going through the roof and everything. But the aftermath of just how everything just twisted, how the metal just twisted the way it did. You'd never expect that. Well, it changed how I went to school, because I had to go to Memorial School on split sessions. I went in the afternoon from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to like 5. So that gave me the mornings to work, and I used to make ice cream for DeRoche's Ice Cream in the morning and go to school in the afternoon. So it was really different. I think we lost a lot in the year and that we were gone out of the school, because we were only going for school for like 4.5 hours a day. So I think myself and probably everybody was amazed on how fast this school was rebuilt and was opened the following year to let us back in. And just to watch it watching the metal being taken out of here, the steel, and then having everything rebuilt, like I said, within a year. And a lot of what you see today is what was built back then. There was a big change from what we had to what we got. One of the things is when we were going to school, we were going to summer school. We were going 4 quarters when I was going to school, my freshman and sophomore. And they had to have air conditioners in the windows at that time. And you could see the air conditioners in the windows at the fire. We didn't have those after we came back and such, so that was one plus. But it was just, everything was new except for, you go in the basement and you could tell that, there had been a fire here, because there was still markings and stuff. They didn't gut the whole basement, the first floor or whatever. But I think they did a nice job. I think now it needs to be updated again. It's been a long time.
I drove the old fire truck up here. Actually, when I heard the whistle go off, get up, get dressed, get your night gear on, down to the station, and the dispatch, I think it was Mac McClevey then, he hollered out the window, Alvirne High School. And I said, yeah, that'll be somebody tripped the alarm somewhere. When we got in the truck and headed up here, I said, ooh, wow. That's not just Alvirne High School's phony call. That's a real thing. Then I relayed water from the chapel. Nashua hooked onto the chapel and relayed water up to me. And then I pumped into the aerial. And that was pretty near all day long. Well, about the time we got to Goodwin's Fried Clam Stand, about the time we got there, you could see smoke, and I said, "Ooh, maybe this is a real thing." And then Bobby Buxton was he was right on it. He did fine, he really did. Frank was at his camp, and he left Bob in charge. So Bob had everybody, all the surrounding towns coming before he called Frank. And he should have called Frank first by the sounds. But he did a super job, I thought. Well, it started in the gym, is the way it looked. but it just kept coming forward. There was no stopping. It's like it had accelerants. But back then, there was no way to check that. Yeah, it went quick. I mean, it really did. And when you look at it, it's all cement block and steel. You wouldn't think there was enough stuff here to burn.
After the fire, I know the firefighters spent a lot of time here salvaging things, and you had like students come in, all the teachers came in the next day and started salvaging. How did that all go?
That I don't know, because I was just volunteer. It was all volunteer then, and I had to work.
Okay.
So I had to go back to work. When I was 13, I kicked off the fire truck, which was Squad A back then. It would have been the brush fire truck. And then we got the brush fire truck, they called it 74. When I turned 14, they put me on the juniors. And I was on the juniors till I was 20. I think when I was 21, they put me on permanent. And I stayed on till 73 or 74, somewhere in there, and retired as a lieutenant.
Hi everybody, I'm Steve Beals, principal of Alvirne High School. I'm so pleased to be part of this documentary about the Alvirne fire. When I recently heard that there was video footage of the fire, throughout my long tenure in the town of Hudson as a community member, at one time student at Alvirne, a teacher at Alvirne, and now principal of Alvirne, I've always been fascinated with the pictorial history of the Alvirne fire. The homage that I pay to all those in the fire service, both volunteer members and full-time members of the department, and really the community rallying point. When I go back in time, I was just a third grade student at the time, attending the Webster School with Ralph Pierce as my teacher. And I remember a Saturday morning vividly with my parents saying, "Oh my gosh, the high school's on fire." We were not the type that would go out and try to find the fire. That wasn't what we did as a family. But I certainly remember some of the impacts. It was small in our family. My oldest brother at the time was in 5th grade, and he attended school for the remainder of that year in Nashua, as the high school and the middle school went to double sessions at Hudson Memorial School. The 5th graders went out of town. I believe there may have been some other grades. As I became principal at Alvirne, and still again through my history, I graduated from Alvirne in 1985. Came back as a teacher in the early 90s until I left to become a school administrator in other communities, and then came back. I had the real pleasure of working with Alvirne trustee members, Peter Dolliff, former superintendent of school, Don Shepard, former school board member, and Webb Palmer, as well as a host of other Alvirne trustees. And frequently there were discussion points because Webb Palmer loved to tell stories. Peter Dolliff, as an incredible gentleman, always had a perspective of how much the community rallied around such an event. And that I still think is prevalent today. I learned already more today than I knew before. I learned about the volunteer fire department and the volunteer fire service in Hudson before it became a full-time department. I know now of the full-time department and the collaborations that we have with the Hudson Fire Department. I know that the calls that we make from Alvirne High School or other schools and build relationships over time with the paramedic staff, with the fire staff. They help coordinate a bonfire for our graduates every year, and I'm grateful for the collaborations. Having recently finished the CTE project and knowing the Inspectional Service Division is part of the Hudson Fire Department and all that encompasses with Steve Doobie, an Alvirne graduate and former colleague of mine through the growing up process at the Houseman family home in Hudson. My wife is a Houseman. So I just hold in homage that the celebration of the community spirit that has always been prevalent in Hudson. Peter Dolliff, as a mentor figure for me as a school administrator, said the community spirit of Hudson was so alive and well, not just the day of the fire, in the days following the fire, with teachers, with community members, with students coming to the safe parts of this building to wash down and save materials. They put instantaneously the books that could be restored into a storage place. You had people volunteering their time to clean those areas that were filled with ash soot in other areas. And then you had the work of the Hudson School Board and the School Administrative Unit, Don Shepard, Webb Palmer, Peter Dolliff, Larry Burton, and others, who in 1 year's time reopened a building in its similar likeness, but now with some of the fire safety standards that we have in place today. We're really proud of the efforts of the Hudson Fire Department, and I really look forward to seeing the live video, and I'm really appreciative of Hudson Community Television and all those involved in inviting me to participate in this video.